I understand you have no doubt whatsoever that Vladimir Putin is responsible for Alexej Nawalny's death. Do you?
I don't think that we can have any doubts after everything that's been done to Alexej Navalny over the years, and quite realizing the fact that Vladimir Putin considered Alexej Navalny his personal enemy.
Do you have any theory why it would happen now, on the very day that Navalny's wife was scheduled to appear at the Munich Security Conference in front of dozens of world leaders, or was this timing just a coincidence?
And why not? I mean, Vladimir Putin has crossed all the lines over these years. For 2 years, he's been leading a war of aggression against Ukraine, and tens of thousands of people are dead. There were war crimes committed by the Russian army there. And Alexej Navalny's murder was not the first political assassination in our country. Boris Nemtsov was assassinated in front of the Kremlin walls in 2015, in front of the whole world, for the whole world to see. And yes, Alexej Navalny was a very prominent Russian politician, someone who could talk to people, who was very successful in explaining those difficult things that some people do not understand. He was the one who could get people out in the streets. He was honest and honorable, and he wanted a better future for our country. These are the things that Vladimir Putin has always been very much afraid of. And so, yes, they tried to kill him with poison. They failed, and then they've been threw Alexej Navalny in prison. They tortured him for 3 years, and then they actually killed him.
Do you think the timing of his death has anything to do with the elections in Russia next month?
It could very well be. I mean, look at how this electoral campaign is developing. We just saw the very short-lived campaign by Nadezhdin, who is a very cautious political figure, sort of a systemic figure. And until recently, he was guest on many propaganda shows. But he was the only candidate running on an anti-war platform. And look what happened in Russia. Tens of thousands of people went out in the streets and stood for hours in cold winter temperatures to put their signatures to support Nadezhdin. And most people in those lines were young people who don't even know who Nadezhdin is. They have no idea who this person is. All they could see that this was the only person running on an anti-war platform. So when they went out to put their signatures for Nadezhdin, they did it not really for Nadezhdin, in support of Nadezhdin himself as a political figure, but against the war. And this is important, and Vladimir Putin understands that. So he realized that he could not allow anyone, even such a cautious candidate, to be on the ballot, and he removed him. Well, Alexej Navalny, even behind bars, has always represented a big threat to the regime, as is every single opposition figure who has been locked up to silence these people, like my husband, who has been in opposition to Vladimir Putin since Vladimir Putin came to power. My husband has been in a solitary cell since last September, not able to have any human communication. He has not seen anyone in that prison colony where he's held, because he's been kept isolated from everyone. Every voice counts, and every voice is considered a threat by the regime, every dissenting voice.
Alexej Navalny was poisoned, but he was saved in Berlin and could have stayed there. However, he went back to Russia aware of the risk. Your husband Vladimir did the same. He was poisoned twice and barely survived. And still he did not go into exile, even though he has a British passport as well. But he returned to Russia to continue his work. This was extremely brave and obviously extremely dangerous. Why did these both men do this?
Because they're true Russian patriots in the purest sense of this word. They believe, it's hard for me to talk about Alexej in the past tense, you know. Alexej believed, and my husband believes, and many of those who have been locked up by the regime believe that our country deserves better. And my husband, just like Alexej Nawalny, has always believed that as a Russian politician, it was his duty to stand with those who are running very high risks to their freedoms and very often to their lives, to stand with them, to share the risks and challenges faced by people back home, and to show through their own example that you can overcome your fear. My husband has always, I think, deep down, he never talks about this, not like that literally, but I've always felt that he somehow feels that what he's fighting for is bigger than just him, is bigger than his life. And he's proven it through his actions twice, by returning twice after poisonings and refusing to leave the country when the full-scale invasion had broken out, and Vladimir spoke to all the media and all the politicians saying that this was a crime of aggression and a Nuremberg-style tribunal was needed to prosecute all those responsible. He realized what risks this carried, but he also realized that this is much bigger. Vladimir Putin needs to be stopped. The regime needs to be stopped. For as long as this regime is allowed to survive in the Kremlin, warmongering will continue, repression in the country will continue, and people will continue dying from sudden death syndrome, like they said, like the authorities said, what happened in the case of Alexej Nawalny.
Mm. Your husband was convicted last April and is held in a facility in Siberia. What do you know about his condition, and how do you keep contact?
Until end of January, Vladimir, since last September, from last September to end of January of this year, Vladimir had been held in a strict regime prison colony in Western Siberia, in solitary cell, in basically a punishment cell. You know, it's just a few square meters cell with a bed that is affixed to the wall, with a backless stool as the only piece of furniture there. Not much human contact except with his lawyers, which is already, you know, a luxury in today's Russia. Reading and writing materials, he was only allowed for an hour and a half a day. And half an hour a day, he was allowed to walk in a small enclosed courtyard without seeing anyone. And that left him, plus his night sleep, that left him with 13 hours of doing absolutely nothing, of absolute void. At the end of January, he was declared a consistent violator of the rules of serving his sentence and was moved to a so-called special regime prison colony, which is the harshest grade in the Russian penitentiary system. He's still in Western Siberia, but his conditions have not changed much. It's still the same few square meter cell. He's still in isolation. His bed is still affixed to the wall. So the same things, but just the colony, the regime itself in the colony is stricter.
How often are you in contact?
We are able to correspond through the prison mail system. That is a system in which all letters, of course, go through censorship. But we are able to correspond this way.
When did you last speak to him?
I last spoke to my husband last summer. At the end of last year, my husband was allowed a 15-minute phone call. And we have 3 kids. So 15 divided by 3 means that each kid got 5 minutes. 5-minute talk with their father, for the first time in over half a year. I was standing there with a timer because I could not allow one of the kids to speak to their father for longer than 5 minutes, because that would take time away from the other two. And of course, I did not speak to him myself because I did not want to take that time away from the kids. Those precious 15 minutes. Just a week ago, Vladimir and I celebrated. He in Siberia, I was on the road. Our 20th wedding anniversary, and Vladimir requested a call with me on that particular occasion, and was denied because the prison authorities decided that this was not a circumstance exceptional enough for this call to be allowed.
It's even hard to listen to you describing this. How afraid are you for your husband's life?
You know, our family has been living like this for years. Just like the war in Ukraine that really began in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea, this hell for our family began in 2015 with the first poisoning of my husband. And then there was the second poisoning, and Vladimir continued his work and refused to back down, refused to give in to intimidation. And he said that such close attention by the Russian authorities meant he was doing the right thing. He was on the right track. He hit them where it hurt. So he realized that he needed to continue with his advocacy for the Magnitsky legislation. And he's been involved in this advocacy since 2010, since the launch of the campaign. And I don't know, I just think that I am afraid for him every single day, but also I cannot allow for this fear for his life to stop me from continuing the work that is so important to him and is truly important to me as his partner and a mother of 3 children who are also Russian citizens, and for myself as a Russian citizen. This is a murderous regime that only knows how to steal and kill. And I believe that it is my duty to try and do everything I can to bring a little bit closer the day when this regime collapses and all those responsible for the crimes against the Russian population and the crimes against our neighbors are brought to justice.
But still, all surveys, as unreliable as they may be, still show a strong majority of Russians in favor of Putin's regime. Is this only the ever-present propaganda? Are people not telling the truth in surveys? Is it the fear of persecution? Or how would you explain that?
Well, first of all, I would truly discourage you from trusting opinion polls that are carried out by state-controlled pollsters in a neo-totalitarian state. And any opinion polls, even not those carried out by state-controlled pollsters, cannot be trusted in a society where there is fear, because the regime systemically uses intimidation and repression against anyone who dares oppose the official narrative. But even if we look at the polls, take the polls conducted by Russian Field, this independent organization, they say that the response rate since the full-scale invasion has been vacillating between 5 to 7%, which means that when you are told that 80% of the Russian population supports the war, supports Vladimir Putin, it means that it is the 80% of those 5 to 7% of people who actually agreed to answer the question. And how many of them agreed to answered the question and said, yes, we support everything, just to be left alone. So that is not the sign that we should rely on. We should look at other, maybe secondary signs. Over last 3 days, thousands of Russians went out to lay flowers to commemorate Alexej Nawalny. Around 400 people were arrested for laying flowers at memorials to victims of repression. We should look at the short-lived campaign of Boris Nadezhdin, where these tens of thousands of people were not just signing a list, some kind of list in support of Nadezhdin. They were leaving all their personal information, their names and their addresses. And this in society, in a country where you can get several years in jail for just standing in the street with a blank sheet of paper, that, leaving your address and your full name under a petition in support of an anti-war candidate is in itself an act of courage. And we should look at the ever-growing number of political prisoners. But of course, the Russian regime doesn't call them political prisoners. These people, just like in the Soviet times, are being portrayed by the regime as criminals, spies, foreign agents, and traitors. So just like in the Soviet times, we don't have any dissenters. There are just an incredible number of criminals and traitors in the country. And that number is growing by the day. And I think that this should be an indication of the real support of Vladimir Putin. That the fact that people, despite all the repressive methods used by the regime, that include all the Soviet techniques, including punitive psychiatry and physical violence and Stalin-era prison terms of 10, 15, 25 years, and Stalin-era narrative of the state treason and spying. Despite all these things, we hear about new arrests, new detentions, and new sentences every single day. And people continue going out in the streets to lay flowers, to support anti-war candidates, to do anything that they can. So I believe that we should probably pay more attention to secondary signs than to results of official opinion polls.
Putin will get another term as president in March. He is 71 now. How long do you think he will rule Russia?
I believe that Vladimir Putin intends to rule Russia for as long as he lives. And sometimes I believe that he believes himself to be here forever. But the fact is, what will take place in Russia next month cannot be called an election. This process has nothing to do with the democratic process that is called election in any civilized, normal country. What Vladimir Putin will do in just 3 weeks, a little over 3 weeks, will be just reappointing himself yet again as head of the Russian state, and I should say Tsar. Because in 2020, there was a so-called referendum carried out in the country that basically destroyed the country's constitution and made Vladimir Putin into a Tsar. There is not one single thing that Vladimir Putin cannot do according to the amendments adopted to the constitution of the Russian Federation. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe yet again examined the results of that referendum and declared and called on its member states to not recognize the legitimacy of Vladimir Putin as president of the Russian Federation following this so-called election. Another reason for the fact that this election cannot be seen as a legitimate process and Vladimir Putin cannot be seen as a legitimate leader is the fact that Vladimir Putin kills all the opponents, all his opponents that actually represent competition to him, like Boris Nemtsov or Alexej Nawalny. And he forces other competitors out of the country. And another very serious reason not to accept Vladimir Putin's legitimacy after this so-called election is the fact that this election, so-called election, will actually be carried out on occupied Ukrainian territories, where people are forced, coerced, to accept the Russian citizenship in exchange for medication. No such process can be seen as a legitimate process by the international democratic community. So I would call on the international community to call Vladimir Putin who he is, a criminal wanted by the ICC, not a legitimate ruler of the Russian Federation.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I still have two more questions. Apart from that, what you just said, what would you expect from the West, from the EU and from the United States?
Unity. Unity in supporting Ukraine, Ukraine's war effort. Unity in making sure Vladimir Putin pays for his crimes. Unity in supporting that part of Russian civil society that continues opposing the regime despite all odds, very often at a very high risk for their freedom and their lives. Unity is what I would like to see from the international community.
But concerning the war in the Ukraine, more and more people in the West say the Ukraine cannot win. Let's negotiate a peace deal with Putin. What's your take on this?
You know, over the years, I've watched my husband work. I've watched him making those speeches, addressing different international platforms, addressing politicians. And I cannot remember how many times I've heard him say, please do not appease a dictator. This will lead to absolutely horrendous consequences. Please do not do this. But yet again, over, well, a quarter of a century of his rule, Vladimir Putin was able, time and again, to get away with committing those crimes. And yet and again, the West would express concern about the crimes committed, about the invasion of Georgia, about the annexation of Crimea, about peaceful protests squashed in Russia. And then, yet again, Vladimir Putin would be given a compromise, would be offered a compromise, or some kind of, resetting of relations, or something else. And there were always those politicians in the West willing to trade human rights for gas and oil. Well, look where it led us. There is a full-scale war in the middle of Europe. People are dying in tens of thousands. Do you really believe that by appeasing Vladimir Putin yet again, offering him a way out of this war, you would somehow end the aggression? This will not happen. Vladimir Putin will see it not as a compromise. Bullies do not understand compromise. Bullies understand only a strong hand. Bullies see compromises as a sign of weakness of their opponent. So he will take it as a sign that he can carry on, and he will regroup, and in a few years we will see another war. And that will continue for as long as Vladimir Putin's regime is allowed to survive in the Kremlin. Warmongering will continue and repression will continue. And so I do not believe that this appeasement, and there is no other word for this, this is appeasement, can lead to anything good. And I believe that this is a very wrong policy and is not acceptable anymore.
Jewgenija Kara-Mursa, thank you so much for your time and all the best to you and to your husband.
Thank you very much.